If you're about to spend $600 this summer on raised bed lumber, bagged garden soil, and a season of fertilizer, you're standing inside the window where the next 3 growing years decide whether that money buys you a working garden or a slow leak you'll refill every April. An Aztec farmer outside the old lake city of Tenochtitlan never spent a single coin on any of it. He built a bed that fed his family for 40 years, and 17 American states have a code on the books that quietly prevents you from copying him. But the code itself isn't what's blocking you. The code is just the cover. The actual reason the chinampa never made it into the American backyard is sitting in a single line of a county zoning memo from the spring of 1937, and almost nobody outside 3 planning offices has read it in the 80 years since. Most home gardeners assume the ancient world grew less food per square foot than we do. The Aztecs grew 13 times more, on worse land, with no chemicals. In water their conquerors later called undrinkable. A team at the Food and Agriculture Organization measured it, 7 harvests a year on the same plot for 600 years running. No fallow seasons, no soil amendment, no tractor. The bed is older than the United States, and there's one still producing lettuce this Tuesday morning in Mexico City. The plot is called a chinampa, and it isn't really Aztec. The Aztecs didn't invent it, they scaled it. The technology belongs to a people called the Nahua, who lived in a town called Culhuacan on the southern edge of Lake Xochimilco around the year 1100. The Mexica, the people Europeans later renamed the Aztecs, took the system over when they founded Tenochtitlan in 1325 and pushed it across 9,000 hectares of shallow lake. By the time Hernán Cortés and his men first saw the city from a mountain pass in 1519, the Chinampas were feeding 200,000 people. One of those soldiers wrote it down. He called the floating gardens enchantment, like something out of a fantasy novel. He was a hardened veteran, and the gardens broke his composure. The truth Hernán Cortés never figured out is something you should know before we go any further. The chinampas don't actually float. The Spanish called them floating gardens, and the name stuck for 500 years. What they actually are is anchored. Willow trees, driven as live stakes into the lake bed and grown into a living root wall, hold each plot in place. The canals that wrap every bed make the whole grid look like islands drifting on water from a distance. They aren't. They are sitting on the bottom, locked in by tree roots, sealed by mud, and fed by water that wicks up through the soil from the canal on all 4 sides. That's the whole secret. A bed that waters itself, fertilizes itself, and never goes dry. 6 items explain how and why you've never been allowed to build one. The first thing a chinampero did was drive willow stakes into the soft lake bed in a rectangle around a plot roughly the size of a 2-car garage. These were not dead posts. They were live cuttings from a native willow the Nahua called a huejote. Within 2 growing seasons, every stake had rooted. Within 5, the willows were trees, and their root mass had woven itself into a living wall, holding the whole bed in place. That wall is the part nobody copies today, and the part that should bother every gardener who has watched a wooden raised bed rot in 7 seasons. A Home Depot cedar frame, 4 feet by 8 feet, runs around $200 in lumber alone. You replace it in 9 years. The willow wall the Mexica drove into Lake Xochimilco in 1450 is still holding the same plot together 6 centuries later. Between the stakes, the farmer wove reed wattle, free, harvested from the lakeshore that afternoon. Inside that woven basket, layer by layer, he started building soil from the bottom of the lake itself. The frame was alive, the fill was free, and the cost so far was 0. Next comes the fill, which is the part the fertilizer industry pretends does not exist. The Aztec farmer didn't buy soil. He didn't buy compost. He scooped black anaerobic mud out of the canal beside his plot and laid it down in layers 10 centimeters thick. Between each mud layer, he packed decomposing water plants. The canals grew on their own. Mud, weeds, until the surface stood about 2 feet above the waterline. Then he capped it with a thin layer of topsoil and ash and let the whole thing cure for a month. That mud is the engineering insight your county extension office will never explain to you because there is nothing to sell you in it. Canal bottom mud in a healthy aquatic system is the richest growing medium on Earth. Fish waste, bird droppings, decomposed plant matter, silt washed in from every storm. All of it free. All of it self-renewing. Every few weeks, the chinamperos spread a fresh basket across the surface, and the plot was fertilized continuously, forever, by the lake itself. A typical American backyard gardener spends $80 to $150 a year on fertilizer every year for the life of the bed. The chinampa spends zero. The math has been embarrassing since 1450. A modern American farmer pulls 1 crop a year off a field, 2 if the season is generous, then leaves the land bare through the winter. A chinampero pulled 5, sometimes 7, up to 8 on the highest performing beds, according to the FAO survey teams that walked Xochimilco in 2017. Lettuce in 60 days, radish in 30, cilantro in 45, maize, beans, squash, tomato, chili, amaranth, chia. The plot was never empty. As one crop came out, another went in. A single chinampa carried 4 to 5 different crops at different stages of maturity at any given moment. Harvest happened weekly, not seasonally. The yields ran 3 to 4 times what slash-and-burn maize produced on the same land, and somewhere around 13 tons of total food per hectare per year when you count every cycle. Enough to feed 7 adults on the surface area of a small backyard pool. Modern intensive agriculture with synthetic nitrogen and patented seed hits roughly 20 tons on the best industrial soil. The chinampa hits 13 with mud and a stick. A single plot like this still grows nearly half the produce eaten in Mexico City today. The canals around every chinampa weren't decoration. They were the second half of the engine. The water wasn't passive. It was a working part of the farm. The canals held fish. Native species, mostly axolotl, and a small fish, the Mexica, called amelote. Both edible, both reproducing on their own. The farmer poled a flat boat through the canals to dredge mud, and on the same trip, he could pull dinner. Every canal was simultaneously irrigation, fertilizer source, fish farm, and waste disposal for the bed above it. The water did the irrigation by itself. The agronomists call it sub-irrigation now. The water table sat about 6 inches below the surface of the bed, and capillary action pulled moisture up through the porous mud. The plants drank from underneath. They never wilted in a heat wave, because the water reservoir was the entire lake. A drought that wiped out a cornfield a mile inland did nothing to a chinampa. Every farmer drew from the lake for free. The Aztec version of that engineering cost the price of an afternoon's labor and lasted 6 centuries. Which is exactly why somebody, somewhere, eventually had to find a way to make it illegal. So here is the picture we have so far. A bed built for the cost of an afternoon. Soil that feeds itself from a lake. Seedlings that germinate at 95% in mud. 7 harvests a year on the same plot, forever. A canal that throws in free fish on the side. The chinampa is the cheapest, longest producing food system ever built, and almost no American gardener has ever been allowed to build one. Not because the engineering is hard. The engineering is mud, sticks, and water. The reason sits in 17 state statute books and 1 federal law. 5 of those statutes are about water that lands on your own roof. One of them quietly changed in 2023. and you will see why the chinampa had to be quietly zoned out. Start with rainwater. In 17 American states out west, the rain that falls on your roof legally belongs to a downstream rancher. This is called prior appropriation doctrine, and it has been the law of the Western water table since the 1870s. Colorado House Bill 16-1005 caps household rainwater capture at 110 gallons across 2 barrels. Utah Senate Bill 32 caps it at 2,500 gallons registered, 200 unregistered. Nevada operates under Assembly Bill 138. New Mexico, Wyoming, Arizona, Idaho, Montana, Oregon, Washington, and California layer their own variants on top. A chinampa needs standing water in volumes that blow past every one of those caps the day you dig the canal. Then there is the Clean Water Act. Section 404 of the Clean Water Act, federal, covers all 50 states. After the Sackett ruling in May 2023, the Environmental Protection Agency narrowed its definition of a protected wetland. The narrowing helped some homeowners. It did nothing for anyone whose lot touches a seasonal stream or a soggy patch of low ground, because the Army Corps of Engineers still requires a permit to dredge or fill those, and dredging is the defining action of building a chinampa. You scoop mud, you move soil, you hit the trigger. Then there is your state. California has the Porter-Cologne Act. New York has Article 15. Massachusetts has the Wetlands Protection Act. Each one stricter than the federal floor. Each one requiring its own paperwork before you put a shovel in. Then there is your homeowners association. Hundreds of homeowners association contracts ban ponds, water features over 18 inches deep, and any agricultural use of a residential lot. Only Florida, Illinois, and Colorado have passed laws protecting homeowners from those bans. The other 47 states leave you to the contract you signed when you bought the house. And then there is your local zoning office. Suburban residential codes almost universally ban what they call agricultural operations on residential lots. A few tomatoes in a raised bed, fine. A 30-foot mud and water installation feeding a family of 5, not fine. Stack the rainwater caps, the federal wetland rule, the state wetland laws, the homeowners association covenants, and the local zoning, and you get the truth. The chinampa is not banned by name. It is banned by 40 laws that quietly add up. So here is what the Aztec farmer knew that we were taught to forget. The lake fed his family for 40 years on willow stakes and a basket of mud. He built it once. He never paid a supplier a single coin. His great-grandchildren were still pulling lettuce off the same plot when Spanish conquistadors first saw the lake. And a Mexican farmer named Rosa Garcia is still pulling lettuce off the same kind of plot in Xochimilco this week.